I still remember that room. A small, dark-walled practice room with an old piano in the corner that was slightly out of tune, and a clock on the wall that ticked so dryly that the second hand felt like it was pressing down on my chest. It was the morning I had arranged with the town promoter to audition my sons. I just wanted them to have a chance to get a foot in the door of the local theater, to begin a journey that I hoped would lead them out of the cramped living conditions. But what I didn't expect was for the youngest of the family, Michael, who was about 5 years old, to stand silently by the practice room door, his dark eyes staring into the darkness before him, as if facing a world too big for his small body. Michael wasn't a demanding kid. He usually followed his brothers around, playing or drumming with random objects. I'd seen him humming along to the radio, but I never thought he'd actually want to stand in line with them for this important audition. Yet that morning, the boy stood there, his tiny hands clutching the hem of his shirt, his lips pressed together as if fighting back a tremor that ran through his body. I stood a little way back, leaning against the wall, watching him. The way he hesitated, tiptoed as if to step in and then back out, made me realize something a father finds hard to accept. His child's fear was so strong it was making him hurt. His brothers were tuning their guitars, tapping out rhythms, rehearsing the harmonies. No one paid any attention to Michael. The room was heated with the children's anxiety. I knew they wanted to impress the promoter. It was their first big chance. I didn't want any disturbances, especially from a 5-year-old boy. Yet when I was about to call him out to play, Michael looked up at me, his eyes bright but trembling slightly. "Daddy, I want to sing too." That sentence made the air around me stop. I could hear my heart pounding. I looked into his eyes, a look of fear and longing, the eyes of a child who didn't know the world yet, but was perceptive enough to know that the moment before him might never come again. I knelt down and put my hand on his shoulder. His shoulder was so small it was barely half the size of my hand. "Are you sure, Michael?" He nodded slightly, but there was a determination in it that I had never seen in any of my children, even those much older. I sighed, not in disappointment, but in the realization that from this moment on, the story of my family might change in a way I wasn't ready to face. I could have forbidden him, told him he was too young, but I saw something in his eyes, a spark I couldn't dare extinguish. The air in the room grew thick. His brothers turned to look at him, their faces curious and hesitant. They didn't want Michael to ruin the audition, I understood. But before they could open their mouths, I held up my hand to silence them. I remember the moment clearly. The door to the rehearsal room was slightly open, a gentle breeze rustling the curtains. Michael took a small step, then stopped. I could feel his shaky breath, as if each inhalation contained a silent struggle. He looked toward the small stage in the middle of the room, a place with only a few wooden chairs and an old microphone. His eyes were confused, then panicked. I knew he wanted to turn and run. A 5-year-old facing such a challenge, he could give up. But then, as if by some invisible force, Michael took a half step forward. His eyes met mine. I said nothing, just nodded slowly. And it was that nod, I could feel it, that pulled him out of his fear. Michael took a deep breath. Perhaps the deepest moment of his life. His little shoulders shook slightly. I stood behind him, my hand on his back, giving him the little reassurance I could give. The feeling inside me was strange. I knew I wasn't just helping a child step onto the stage. I was helping him step into a destiny that even I couldn't fully understand. His brothers watched in silence. The show's producer had just arrived, standing with his arms crossed under the dim yellow lights. He hadn't recognized Michael yet, hadn't known that a 5-year-old boy was about to audition. The surprise made my heart pound even harder. I leaned down, whispering loud enough for only my son to hear. "Do what you feel." Michael didn't respond. He just squeezed my hand, a brief squeeze that held all the weakness and determination a child could have. Then he let go, a small step forward, then another. When it was in place, the door behind it closed softly. The room was so quiet that I could hear everyone breathing. My 5-year-old child stood in the dim light, his dark eyes trying to stay calm. He didn't know if he would sing well or not. He only knew that he wanted to try, and I, the father standing behind him, Knew that that moment, no matter the outcome, would forever be a cut in time, clearly dividing before and after. Because right at that old wooden door, and I saw the fire begin to burn. I had never seen a silence as tense as that morning. Not a silence of emptiness, but an electric silence, as if a snap of the fingers could wake up a thunderstorm. Michael was standing in front of the microphone. The dim yellow light illuminated his small face. His round black eyes stared into the empty space in front of him, searching for something to hold on to. I stood a few steps away, feeling like I was being put to the test myself. But what made me even more nervous was the way my son trembled little by little in the final seconds before the audition began. No one said anything. His brothers stood in a line, pursed lips, both nervous for themselves and worried for him. The showrunner had his arms crossed, his eyes half expectant, half suspicious, as if wondering what I was planning to do by letting a 5-year-old stand in the middle of the stage. I heard Randy whisper to Jackie, "He's so small. What if he forgets the words?" It was a soft remark, but in that tight room, it rang like an alarm. Michael heard it. I knew he heard it. His shoulder jerked, like a needle had hit his weakest nerve. I saw his hand twitch. His fingers dug into his pant leg, clenching it so hard his knuckles turned white. He inhaled, but the breath was caught in his chest, making his small chest heave painfully. I stepped a little closer but didn't touch him. I was afraid that one extra movement would cause him to collapse. I whispered, loud enough for only he to hear, "Michael, look at me." He turned his head, his eyes full of confusion. It was only 2 seconds, but I swear, 2 seconds was a lifetime. I bent down, placing my hand firmly behind his back, not pushing, just holding it there for support. "Come on, kid. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just sing like you always sing at home." I saw his lips move. No sound, just a small resistance to the fear that was gripping him. At that moment, the showrunner interrupted with a click of his tongue. "Are we starting or not?" The words hit my mind like a metallic sound, full of pressure, full of doubt. His brothers looked at each other. I could see the struggle in each of their eyes, wanting to perform, but also afraid that Michael would upset the group. Marlon sighed softly. "Maybe next time, Mikey?" But before he could finish, I held up my hand to silence him. I looked at Michael. Michael looked at me. The light reflected off his eyes, making them sparkle even more, as if they contained a stormy sky. I said, this time more clearly and decisively, "Go on, baby. You can do this." And that second, the second I chose to trust rather than fear, changed the entire course of the story. But Michael still didn't speak. He stood still. A long time. So long that the showrunner began to grow impatient. I heard him take a step forward, his shoes hitting the floor with a heavy thud. "If he's too scared, we can move on." At that moment, Michael took a deep breath. A breath so long that his chest rose and fell like a wave. I saw his hand loosen. His fingers slowly let go of his pants leg. His small shoulders relaxed. His eyes closed. A moment. Then they opened. That new look was completely different. It was no longer the look of a confused child. It was the look of a small soul trying to overcome itself. But I knew it was still afraid. I could feel it in every uneven breath. However, there was something else. Something like an electric current running through it. An energy I couldn't name, but it sent shivers down my spine. His brothers noticed the change before I did. Jackie whispered, "Look, he's doing it." The group stood up straight, as if preparing to witness something they didn't quite understand. The last seconds before Michael sang were the most terrifying silence I'd ever experienced. Not because I was afraid he'd do something wrong, but because I knew that with just one mistake, his young soul would be damaged. I tilted my head, waiting. Everyone waited. Then, it held the microphone with both hands. A slight bow, a look up. It all happened in about 3 seconds. Those 3 seconds felt like a lifetime. Those 3 seconds were the bridge between trembling and destiny. And then, I saw its chest heave one last time before it exhaled. A very light breath, but a decisive one, as if it had just put all its fear to the ground. In that moment, I knew it would sing. Even the first line alone was enough to decide everything. But I also knew, if it sang, the world would never be the same again. The small room was silent. It wasn't the silence of waiting, but the silence of a storm, when all sound dies down to make way for something about to explode. Michael stood there, his hands clutching the microphone, his little legs shaking slightly, but his eyes were different. The look in his eyes made me freeze. They were no longer the eyes of a frightened child, but the eyes of someone at war with himself. I stood behind him, so close that I could hear his every breath. Fast, deep, even. I felt each step he took away from his fear, little by little, like a faint breeze turning into a strong current. I knew that the moment he spoke would be more than just a song, but a turning point he didn't quite understand. The showrunner stood with his arms crossed. His gaze was tilted, both curious and challenging. I read in his eyes the thought, let's see what this kid has. Michael's brothers stood still, no doubt or hesitation, just a tense build, as if they were preparing to step up with him. Then Michael inhaled again, this time, without shaking, not broken. A long, clear breath, stronger than his small body would allow. I felt time slowing down. The clock's hands were still ticking, tick, tick, tick. But the sound seemed to fade away, fading, leaving space for what was to come. And then, Michael opened his mouth. The first sound came like a wave cutting through the heavy air. A voice so clear it made me shiver. Not the clear, childish kind. It was the clarity of a soul older than its years, of a feeling so genuine, of a heart that could convey what it felt even at 5 years old. The showrunner immediately stood up straight. His brothers opened their eyes wide. I almost forgot to breathe. Michael's voice wasn't loud, but it resonated with a strange certainty. I'd heard him sing in the yard at play, while humming along to the radio. But never, absolutely never, had he sung with such clarity and feeling. It was as if the small stage itself had activated a part deep within him. He sang the first line, then the second. His eyes grew more confident. His shoulders straightened. His hand let go of the microphone a little. The singing became fuller. A full, soulful voice that was hard to believe came from a child. I saw the showrunner lean forward, as if he were afraid to miss a syllable. He looked at me. There was no doubt in his eyes. It was the look of someone who saw something he didn't expect. The room, small and cramped, had suddenly become a huge stage because Michael had taken it over with his voice. He didn't need to walk. He didn't need to dance. He didn't need to do anything. He just stood there, eyes slightly closed, singing from the heart. But what surprised me most was the emotion in each of his lines. Not the radio imitation, not the childish singing for fun, but real emotion, dense, refined, mature. As if he understood the song, as if he had lived with the song, as if the song was borrowing it to speak. I looked at my hands, a working man's hand, rough, heavy, and thought, how could these hands have given birth to a child with a voice like that? Michael reached the song's small crescendo, and as he drew out the last line, the sound echoed like an arrow through the wall of silence, making the room seem to expand. When he finished, no one moved, no one spoke, no one breathed heavily. It was as if everyone was waiting for confirmation that what they had just heard was true. Michael opened his eyes. He looked around, a little confused. A little nervousness returned, as if he were afraid he had done something wrong. I took a half step forward. But before I could open my mouth, the showrunner slammed his hand on his thigh and stood up. Who is this kid? The question, so direct, so forceful, startled Michael. He backed away a little, his eyes widening. I stepped forward immediately, placing my hand on his shoulder. "This is Michael," I said, my voice hoarse. "My youngest." The showman looked him up and down, then back at me. Not with a doubtful look. The look of someone who had just witnessed something unexpected. "How old is he?" "About 5. The showman let out a startled laugh, not mocking, but so surprised that he didn't know how to react. 5? That voice came from a 5-year-old? I looked at Michael. He was holding my hand, holding it tightly as if he was worried it was all a dream. But no, I knew. That moment, that voice, ripped the silence apart, opening a new path. A path that none of us were ready for, but no one could escape anymore. Michael didn't just sing, he announced his presence, announced it with a voice that no one could ignore. And as I watched it standing in that dim light, I knew the world, even though I couldn't see it, had begun to change. The atmosphere in the room after Michael stopped singing was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was thick, dense, as if everyone were taking a deep breath that no one dared to exhale. The showrunner stood still, hands on hips, eyes fixed on the 5-year-old boy who had just sung a song that had stunned the room. As for me, I felt like the ground beneath my feet was shifting. Not falling, not swaying, but shifting, slightly, but enough to let me know things were about to change direction. Michael stood there, his small hand still gripping the microphone, but looser than before. The look in his eyes as he looked at me wasn't one of pride or joy, but fear. Fear of not knowing if he had done right or wrong. Fear of not knowing what the world around him was thinking. I put my hand on his back, gently rubbing it to let him know I was there. Then the showrunner spoke, his voice almost in disbelief. "This boy should be in the middle of the group." That statement was like throwing a large stone into an already tense pond. Michael's brothers immediately turned to look at me, not angry, not jealous, but surprised, confused. They had never thought that a 5-year-old boy, the one they took out and teased every day, would be asked to be the lead singer. I saw a small crack in their eyes. Very small, but obvious. Jermaine took a half step back, his smile gone. Jackie crossed her arms, her eyes hard, not because she was annoyed with Michael, but because she was trying to understand what had just happened. Marlon stood still as a statue, his mind racing to catch up with the truth in front of him. I understand. As brothers, as a band they had practiced together for so long, they couldn't help but feel sad. I cleared my throat, about to say something to calm them down, but the showrunner continued. "If the group wants to go far, if they want to get out of this town, this boy has to be the leader. There's no doubt about it." Michael jerked his shoulder at that. He turned to me, his dark eyes sparkling, as if asking for help. He didn't want to be the center of the argument. He just wanted to sing. I put both hands on his shoulders to let him know I wouldn't leave him alone. Then I turned to his brothers. "She didn't take your light. She just shines in a different way." That wasn't enough. I knew. How could kids this young just swallow such complicated emotions? The atmosphere became heavier when Jackie asked the question I'd expected to come up. "What about us? We've been trying for so long. Now if Michael shows up, everything will change?" His voice wasn't angry, it was hurt, a very real pain. I opened my mouth to reply, but Michael did something unexpected. He took a small step toward them, his eyes downcast, his voice small but clear. "I just want to sing with you, not instead of you." The room felt like it had been released from a tight rope that could snap at any moment. Jermaine exhaled sharply. Jackie lowered her crossed arms. Marlon blinked repeatedly, trying to stop himself because he must have choked up. That statement, from a 5-year-old, smoothed out what I couldn't put into words. It made his brothers understand that Michael wasn't a rival, not a spotlight stealer, but a special piece of the same puzzle. Before I could thank God, the show producer walked over, his voice serious. "Talent doesn't wait for anyone. If you want to be a big group, you have to accept this. The group needs a leader, and this boy's voice, is something that people have to listen to. I looked at each child's reaction. There was no longer any shade of resistance. There was only acceptance mixed with new hope. It was as if another door had just opened in them. Jackie walked over, put her hand on Michael's head and gently stroked it. "You did great, Mikey." Jermaine smiled, a genuine smile that made me breathe a sigh of relief. "If you sing lead, I'll play the piano to make you shine." Marlon laughed, looking relieved. "But next time, remember to tell us in advance so we don't have a heart attack." Michael looked up, his eyes bright but still a little wet. He looked at his brothers, then at me, and I saw something in his eyes that was bigger than joy, bigger than pride, relief. Because he was afraid he would upset his brothers, afraid he would destroy the group, afraid he would cause a rift, but not now. The moment he said that, saved the morning from turning into a long misunderstanding. I took a step forward, folded my arms, and looked at the group. "Look, this is not just a family. This is a team." My kids stood in a line. Michael was the youngest, but he stood in the middle. Not because I had put him there, but because he naturally belonged there. I knew this change would bring challenges, but I also knew one thing more clearly than anything else. The moment Michael sang didn't just change the group, it changed us, one by one. The strangest thing about life-changing moments is that they often seem so ordinary when they happen. No fireworks, no drums, no lights shining down from the sky. Just breaths, footsteps, and a few words that might be forgotten if no one was paying attention. But that morning, the morning Michael sang before the showrunner, I knew I had just witnessed something that would never be forgotten. Never. After the showrunner left, the door to the rehearsal room closed, leaving us in a different silence than before. No tension, no doubt. Just the silence of people trying to understand what had just happened, trying to absorb the emotions that were pouring out from all sides. Michael, just out of the small light of the rehearsal room, grabbed my hand. His tiny hand, warm, slightly damp with sweat. He looked up, his round eyes sparkling, not with joy, but with exhaustion. "Daddy, did I do okay?" His voice was as small as the wind whispering through the crack in the door. I looked at him for a long time, so long that it felt like time had stopped just waiting for my answer. "You did better than good," I said. "You make me prouder than anything." He didn't laugh out loud. He didn't jump up like the other kids. He just snuggled into me, as if to escape the chaos in his mind. Part of him still couldn't believe what had just happened. Part of him was still just a 5-year-old needing his father's arms to feel safe. I picked him up. He was so light that I could feel every little vibration of his body as he breathed. His brothers walked over, none of them saying anything. But the look they gave Michael was different than it had been at first, no longer afraid of being overshadowed, no longer worried that the group would fall apart. There was only recognition, a feeling of being lit from within. Jackie put her hand on my shoulder. "Dad, I think we can really do it." I nodded. "I think so too." Then Marlon broke the serious atmosphere by teasing Michael. "But next time, remember to tell us so we can prepare our hearts, Mikey." Michael chuckled, a small but genuine smile that made me feel more relieved than ever. We packed up, the old wooden guitar, the rusty microphone, a few crumpled sheets of paper with lyrics. The objects didn't look like anything special, but when Michael stepped off that small stage, they all seemed like part of the door that had just opened before us. On the way home, I didn't say much. Not because I didn't have anything to say, I had hundreds of thoughts in my head, but because I was trying to gather them into something meaningful. Michael sat on my lap in the back seat of the car, his head resting on my chest. He fell asleep within minutes of leaving the gym. The car drove through the old streets of Gary, Indiana. The brown brick buildings, the dim streetlights, the cracked sidewalks. It was all so familiar I didn't even bother looking at it. But when I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Michael sleeping soundly in my arms, I felt like the world around me had changed. Not because they were different, because I was different. Just a few hours before, I had been a father trying to push my children up the ladder of life. But now, I knew I was facing a much greater responsibility. The responsibility to guide something large, delicate, and vulnerable. My son's talent. I'm not an emotional person, but that morning made me wonder, can I protect him from the pressure? Could I keep him a kid when the world would want him to be something bigger? Could I take the group far without letting favoritism ruin everything? I didn't have the answer, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to try. For Michael, for his brothers, for the Jackson family. When we got home, Catherine opened the door. She saw Michael lying on my shoulder, fast asleep, his cheeks rosy. "How was the audition?" she asked. I looked at Catherine for a moment. I wanted to say everything was fine. I wanted to say we'd try again next time. But the truth was louder than words. "Good," I said. "Very good." She looked deep into my eyes, as if she knew what was going on in my head before I could even speak. "Did something happen?" I just nodded. "Michael, there's something special, not normal." Catherine smiled softly. I always knew. I put Michael on the bed. He curled up like a kitten. I sat down next to him, watching him sleep. And in that quiet moment, I saw more clearly than any stage light. His future did not begin when he became famous. His future began this morning, when he dared to stand up, tremble, and sing his first song. It was not just an audition. It was the first page of a book the world would later call by a familiar name, Michael Jackson. And I, the father standing behind us, knew that our journey from this day forward would have no turning back.